done, sort of the opposing of privatisation of council services in Edinburgh, or opposing the bedroom tax, or introducing a participatory budgeting initiative. Those are the sorts of things that give people an idea of what that green vision looks like, not just that we're Lib Dems with a different colour of rosette.
And this, you talked a lot. Sorry, Michael.
No, it's just to say when the SSP collapsed, you might have expected a lot of those people would go to the Greens, but it didn't happen. They moved generally to the SNP. I just wondered what the party had thought about that, the Green Party itself.
Well, it's interesting because I don't think we chased those votes. I don't think we were interested in those votes. I think we were looking at Lib Dem votes. And interestingly, when the Lib Dems collapsed in 2011, those votes went to the SNP as well. And I remember a conversation with another Green of a slightly different persuasion where he told me that we needed to get votes off the Liberals, by which he meant the Liberal Democrats, and we needed to do that by talking about core Green issues, not things like what I was suggesting, which was living wage. Liberal Democrats will never vote for living wage. We can't talk about that. That'll put them off. What we need to do is talk about 20-mile-an-hour zones and land value tax. And I think that was a complete misassessment of what Lib Dem voters were. What he was saying is, Lib Dem voters look exactly like me. If we talk about the things I'm interested in, then they'll vote for us. That didn't happen because Lib Dem voters didn't look like him.
Is it not just that all your concerns have been sorted out with Cameron's greenest government ever?
Yes, you'd have to be very cynical not to think that had been resolved. I suppose, though, that's often a point that people make, that at least in terms of broader environmental rhetoric, that a number of mainstream parties have begun to talk in this area at least, and therefore if you're kind of a soft, inattentive, eco-something voter, then you might be quite satiated by one of the mainstream parties and not feel the need to vote Green. But I wanted to ask you something else, Peter, because you spoke quite a lot there about messaging, but you and policy, I should say, not just messaging. That sounds very comms. But I'm also interested in sort of geography, because you were talking about how, running a sort of a 45% election campaign when you're on 5% may not be a wise strategy. Of course, the question is, I suppose, where those 5% are, and there is in Scottish politics a bit of a geography of greeny votes. And do you think that one of the ways that maybe the Greens can make progress and use the opportunity of the independence referendum and the exposure that it might bring to your policies to sort of focus on specific areas of the country and try and build upon those and build up areas of strength, like I know that the party in England has done around Brighton?
Yeah, well, I hope so. And I think, again, there was a bit of a move in the party to go down the sort of New Labour route of getting big money in employing lots of professional staff and having them do things, so there wasn't really a need for a voluntary party. I think that went really, really badly wrong. And I think one of the things that we need to do is move to a model much closer to that they've done in England around a few places like Norwich, like Brighton, where they've been able to build large numbers of councillors and in Brighton make the breakthrough into Parliament, rather than hoping that somebody's going to come along and give us a large amount of money to employ people with and then it'll all be fine.
Norwich seems strange to me. I can't imagine Alan Partridge voting Green.
I know nothing about Alan Partridge. That's a guilty admission on my part.
No, he's a tremendous character. Armando Iannucci said he's like a man who's desperately trying to be politically correct but doesn't understand what politically correct means. That's the point with Partridge.
I suspect he is actually, and this is appropriate to the moment. He is actually the archetype of the UKIP voter, I suspect.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's a grim thought. All right, that's good there. Maybe we'll just move on to our last topic before we close off, which was the news this week that the BBC has intended to plough £5 million into its coverage of the independence debate. We're discussing on the podcast last week, Peter, that we thought that the STV was actually a bit more fleet-footed and a bit more creative, frankly, than the BBC has been hitherto in terms of its coverage of these questions. Do you welcome the 5 million? Do you think it will substantially enhance the kind of coverage we've seen?
One of the things that I've found most depressing about devolution has been the media. I think it's because of the way in which the media has changed in the time that we've had devolution. The media hasn't been really able to reinforce our democratic settlement. And I mean, it's nowhere near as bad as it is in Wales, where, as far as I can tell, they don't really have any indigenous media. But certainly, Newsnight Scotland is very poor. You still get only really 15 minutes of news every day on the BBC. You maybe get it 2 or 3 times through the day. They take Scottish Government a lot more seriously now than they did before 2007, but even still, it's not great coverage, and I don't think it gives us the democratic culture that we need. And I was very interested. Ian McWhirter told me that he was brought up to Scotland to launch a Scottish edition of The Guardian that they then decided they couldn't afford. And I think it would have been interesting to see what that kind of initiative would have done for Scottish journalism, what it would have done for the rest of British journalism if they had gone ahead with that. I mean, things like the Sunday Herald, which was launched around that time, and I think probably in response to devolution, have been okay, but still not great. And I think one of the things that this debate is really doing is drawing out the need for a much more serious analysis of Scottish politics. It's unfortunate, I think, that you get more coverage of Scottish third division football games in the newspapers than you do of debates in Parliament.
Mm.
You're guaranteed coverage of every third division game in, I think, both the Herald and the Scotsman, but you're not guaranteed coverage of every debate. And that seems to me really unfortunate.
On the football reference, the BBC pays Alan Hansen more than it spends on Scottish football entirely.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes, it does. It does, unbelievably so. So if you talk about BBC supporting Scotland, then that's not particularly good.
But for such insight.
If only I knew who Alan Hansen was. Oh dear, the unworldly. I've been caught out again on my football cluelessness. I'm not part of the body politic in Scotland because I've no interest in the pig's bladder. It's a failure. Mike,
it's just that all you need to know about Alan Hansen is he's paid an exorbitant amount of money to state the bloody obvious every so often.
That's a football there. Yep, it goes into the good kicking, that kind of thing. I could do it. I think I'd be a splendid football pundit. I could be as articulate as the best of them. Well, Michael, what do you think? Do you are you happy that as Peter was saying, the sort of attenuated and not necessarily terrifically successful BBC programming in Scotland will be at least enhanced for what period of time to the tune of £5 million? Is that a thing that warms your proverbial cockles?
That's a very big it depends. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. They say they want to produce a series of documentaries with this money as well. It won't just be in general news coverage. And so it'll be interesting to see what comes out. But I think, I don't mean to do some mindless BBC bashing, so I'll do some mindful BBC bashing, because it must be remembered that part of the BBC's mission statement is to create a kind of sense of British unity. So does that colour their output? I think you'd have to say yes. We've all seen those videos of the behind-the-scenes BBC video training videos on how they're going to deal with this. You know, have you seen the Andrew Neil video?
Yeah, I saw them, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it has to be borne in mind, what are the BBC going to produce, given what their mission statement is, that, you know, and against all the evidence, they try to create this sense of unity, that someone in Kensington's got so much in common with someone in Orkney. I think it will be interesting to see what is produced.
It's really interesting that they didn't do that before 2007. I mean, there's that crushingly awful clip of, I think it was Patricia Hewitt, being asked what she thought was going to happen in the 2007 election, and she said, I think Jack O'Donnell will win it for us.
Yeah.
Where there was so little coverage of Scotland and so little coverage of what was going on that even senior Labour figures didn't know who their own First Minister was.
But yes, but the BBC, like I say, this is their mission statement. That's why they do all the pageantry, all the royalty, all of the, you know, the Olympics stuff. In one sense, they're covering the event, but in another sense, they're trying to create this feeling of the unity of the British people. It's part of what they do. It's in their DNA.
But there is, to put it a different way, I mean, if you study large-scale bureaucracies, and I study one in the context of my doctoral work, invariably you find that they are incoherent in terms of their that you don't find out what the sort of official ideologies or the complex attitudes of an institution is by looking at their founding documents. I'm not saying that the founding documents aren't important, and certainly you've given us some persuasive examples of where the sort of the attempt to produce the sort of imagined community of Britain, if you like, is quite strong. But I am not convinced at all by the sort of image of the sort of biased BBC at the beginning. I think that's much too it's much too sort of conscious and prescriptive. And actually, I would guess that the BBC, employing staff from all over Scotland in lots of different ways, will likely have as much of the different constitutional attitudes as you might expect to find in the average pub, frankly.
But would that come out in its output? The private beliefs of the individuals working there is one thing, but in the actual output, I'm not sure that would be likely to come out.
I don't know. I'm not so sure. I mean, it's because it's a question about agenda setting, isn't it? And what is newsworthy and what isn't, and sort of echoing what you were saying there, Peter, about what gets coverage and what gets neglected, what's foregrounded, what's backgrounded. And those kind of choices are always going to be rather more subtle and difficult to detect, because none of us ever finds out about the stuff that hits the cutting room floor, because it's never broadcast. But I'm just not so convinced that we can read off a kind of an institutional ideology simply by looking at the founding documents. I suspect it's going to be much more nuanced and conflicted and inconsistent than that. And that's certainly my experience of them. But Peter, what do you think?
When I worked in the Scottish Parliament, we had the Lib Dems introducing fees in Scotland, and we tried desperately hard to sell that in pretty much anywhere we could, because this was the party that was totally against fees, and they won a lot of votes off that, and people really believed that they were on the side of students, and we really didn't believe they were on the side of students, and we thought they'd sell students out as soon as they got half a chance. And I think this might be me telling you that I told you so. But I mean, the really interesting thing was that none of the media, the BBC included, could care less that they were introducing these fees, despite it being against their policy. And I thought that was absolutely extraordinary, and I think it was to do partly with the political allegiances of some of the broadcasters, but it was also to do with them not really taking Scottish politics seriously at that time. I thought that was unfortunate.
Another thing to bear in mind about the BBC in general is that there is always an intelligence operative involved in the higher echelons of the BBC. I just thought I'd drop that in. Interesting to note, I think.
I suppose if you're doing it properly and you are a conniving Machiavellian British statesman, then it would be improper if there were not.
But another little trick they do, though, so that they can say that they've put alternative viewpoints on, is because it's such a huge organisation, and then there's other things like the World Service. So generally they go with the middle, or what's perceived to be the middle in politics. But then, so that they can say that they've given time to some more radical elements, they'll put, say, Noam Chomsky on BBC Nepal at 3:00 in the morning, and then they can say, yes, there is diversity of opinion broadcast on the BBC. And this has been quite a long-running trick of theirs as well. I just thought I'd mention that as well.
And it's certainly, it's one of the, I don't know about that particular sleight of hand, but certainly diversity of voices is something which you hear an awful lot. And, Peter, you referenced Newsnight Scotland there, and it is the most endemic failure. Was it Michael? You said if aliens appeared, they'd seem to think that the Scottish population, on the basis of Newsnight, consisted of sort of a harem of 4 elderly men and the occasional woman in terms of the entire population of the country. And it seems to me insane that a country of 5 million people seems to have at most about 15 commentators on it. And we know it isn't true.
Oh, speaking of that, what's happened to Isabel Fraser?
I've no idea. I don't know. But she's been conspicuous by her absence.
She's got her own show. It's called Newsnat.
It's broadcast on the secret Cybernat channel. Exactly. Hashtag Cybernat broadcasting. On which note of Cybernat broadcasting? Thank you very much for coming on the podcast, Peter. It's been lovely to have you.
No problem. It's great. Thank you.
And we'll be back, I think, next week for more chatter about the independence referendum and Scottish politics, more Cybernat broadcasting, hopefully from a broader range of voices than you sometimes hear on your telly and on your radio. So we'll see you then. Cheerio.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, come on, ye true-born Glasgow boys, and listen to my song. I'm going to speak of harmony, it won't detain you long. I've made this little tune for you. I played it on my whistle, and I think the name I'll give to it, the Shamrock and the Thistle. Well, aboard the Royal